I'm going to continue this reading now with a few poems from my second poetry collection, Breakfast in Bed, which was published in the UK by Indigo Dreams Publishing just about a year ago. That's this one. This book was just recently longlisted in the Wales Poetry Book Awards for this year, and I'm really pleased about that. At the time of filming, it's on the long list. When this film comes out, it may be nowhere or it may be on the shortlist, who knows? Getting on the long list is good. So this book really is all about love. This first poem is the first poem in the book, Alone and Together. It has an epigraph from Federico García Lorca. A city that snares slow rhythms. I think he means Seville. In any case, that's where this poem was written. Alone and together. A river flows through afternoon's slow heat. Lorca's pace. Together and alone. Juntos y solo. Babble at cafe tables rises and drops into shadow by the waterside. Sun falls through trees, flicker of fresh leaves in green spring. Solo, juntos, alone and together. Wine is red, time is yellow. The rhythm of the river is ours for this hour adrift. That was written quite some time ago, but seems kind of relevant today, where we're having to do filming of ourselves reading in our own kitchens to be broadcast at festivals where really people should be together. So alone and together. And it's an invitation to spend an hour or so adrift with poetry, really, which is what we're doing. Let's be adrift together. Wendell Berry, the wonderful poet, American poet, US poet, farmer and environmentalist, said, love is not an emotion, it is a motive. And certainly my main motivation for this collection is love. The motivation to gather this work together came from that idea of let's look at love. That's what poetry does, isn't it? I hope I've done it in a novel and different sort of way. And the poem that started me off thinking about putting these poems together in a book was the poem I wrote the day after Joe Cox, the British MP, was murdered in the street, which was back in June 2016. Before I read this, I just want to say, filming in one's own kitchen has its hazards. There's a cat waiting to walk across in front of my screen. I've got a do-it-yourself nutcase, seriously motivated do-it-yourself enthusiast next door who might be drilling the wall at any minute. So if you hear noises off and stuff, it's because we're human beings and we're doing this thing in this way. And let's just get on with it and see if it works. So this is the poem I wrote that was really the motivation for putting this whole thing together. It's a poem I wrote after Joe Cox MP was murdered. After the killing, the day after that man killed Joe Cox, I ate strawberries for breakfast because they were fat and red and ready with the sweetness of joy. I walked to the top of the hill and saw the sea, grey and cold but breathing below, all the while on its incoming tide over endless sands, rolling always and forever. I sat on a seat above the beach in the sun and emptied my mind, watched the waves, sheets of steel rolling on. I listened to Bach played on guitar, massive concertos pitching in 6 stunning strings. I spoke to a young woman who I'd known when she was a girl, and we talked about her glorious baby due soon on some happy day. I bought a new novel to read later. That anticipation that it is there, the words waiting for me when I am ready sometime this summer. I picked herbs from the garden, mint and parsley, and watched the cat rolling in the catnip quite off her face. I saw swallows scything the fat meadow to gather food for their young. And just to make sure that you were there, I sent you a text on a pretext. Still there. I read a poem on Facebook by a friend who said, "We have to do this because however bad the world is, there is love and light and no one can take that away from us." So I wrote new poetry about love because that is all there is. And I thought of life, this life, how we all have to keep breathing over our own endless sands. So let's talk about love. Keep breathing. There's all kinds of poems about love in this book. About love, of love, love poems. Here's one that I wrote for my dad. People seem to like listening to this. It's a tribute to my dad, really. Oil man. No one understood engines like he did. He'd stand there, listen, and he knew. He always knew what to do. He was the car doctor. They came from miles or called him out if they couldn't get started. His large, strong hands with hairy backs would shift the toughest nuts and bolts. Yet with those same fingers, he'd fix the finest needle in a carburettor, so deft, so sure of his actions. The best sight in the world was his legs sticking out from under some car, or his bent back, head under the bonnet, brown overall flapping, baggy trousers billowing, feet in slippers, if Mum didn't catch him first. Pungent sense of engine oil seeped through his skin. It was the driving force in his veins, working silently to make everything work. He had it all for us. Ignition, timing. He was our shock absorber, our brake, our strength, the oil in all our works. That's for my dad. And here's one for a friend who I've actually lost touch with now. We were good mates for a long time. And she's the reason I wear pink shoes. You should have seen the shop. Deep marine blue all over the front. Her tan, if it was good, she'd wear bright yellow to make the contrast with the blue. And she'd make sure her hair colour was the correct shade of red. Real red, not auburn. She sold teapots, all white with coloured dots, blue, red, yellow, green, and jugs for milk, butter dishes to match, cups, saucers and mugs in primary colours with spots and stripes. Even her scrubbing brushes wore colours. Red and green bristles shone out of willow baskets. There were throws in autumn garb, rust, Virginia creeper, scarlet, Acer maroon and beach brown, and cushions to scatter like falling leaves, candles in all colours, some even rainbows with holders to match or contrast. Customers touched things. They couldn't resist. Picked them up, put them back askew, a tight smile. A taut thank you as they left. She'd wait until they'd gone, the door closed behind them, and she'd put everything back exactly where it should be. Perfect. It was her favourite word. She was lovely. She's not on social media. I can't find her. Never mind. So, love poems and stuff. We also need to write about when things go wrong, I think. Can't all be lovely, can it? So this is one of the milder ones that I write about the downside of relationships going wrong. There's quite vitriolic stuff in here as well. This is We Should Have Talked. We should have talked about all that stuff. We should have sat together in your room, blue eye to blue eye, looked close, seen each other, me recognizing you, you seeing me, really seeing. How did we manage to miss ourselves? We should have talked before your gaze followed a separate path, before we looked east and west, before we lost our map. We should have talked before you turned directionless, before I found my certain path. We should have talked. And yes, we should all be talking as much as we can, especially now. And then when things start to go right again and love comes in the window or wherever it comes from, I get a bit seriously into one-to-one love here. This is Being Watched. Her chemise lands in a whisper of silk on slate. Light streaks the wall where afternoon sun finds gaps in blinds. She knows he watches, so she spins. Turns in a whirl of sun and shadows, dust motes float, her skirts swirl and fall, her hands snake in a rhythm only she can feel. Heat pricks her neck. The blush of her knowing shows on her face, and sweat cools, making a dampness on her back. I don't often read this next poem out because it's quite tricky to read out. It's actually a sonnet, but it's a bit of a change on the normal sonnet format. It's the title poem in my book. So this is Breakfast in Bed. In the morning, when you bring me strawberries, it is the way you concentrate so carefully to select each unspoiled bursting berry, the ripest, reddest. It is the way you watch as you raise these gifts to my mouth and place them between my lips. It is the way your eyes see me clearly as I suck and savor these fragrant fruits. I turn my eyes away. Red fruit in glass bowl on pure white sheet. Then it is the way you lick juice from your own lips that wakes new light as our eyes meet. I hope you're enjoying this. Two more from this book. I want to read this one because I particularly like it. It's one of my favourites to read out. Who knows if it's one of the favourites to be heard out there, but I like reading it. This has an epigraph from Allen Ginsberg's poem, Song. The epigraph is, the weight we carry is love. And this is rest in the arms. I remember the hard muscles of your thighs across mine, your arm heavy on my breasts. I am pinned by you, a little afraid of your bulk on me. But as I lie here, hardly able to breathe, I don't want you to move. I am comforted by this load, this holding that I thought would never be again. While our warm bodies cool, exposed by a dragging duvet, I watch moon patterns on the wall, striped shadows of blinds, and I think of Ginsberg's lines. The weight of the world is love. And as I know I won't sleep yet, I try to recall more words. The burden of life is love. The burden of life is love. I hear the steadiness of your breath as you sleep on me. Rest in the arms of love. Thank you. Thank you for listening. It would be better to do this in front of a live audience. It's quite weird. But you're live. You're listening out there somewhere, sometime in my future. It's weird, isn't it? I'm going to read the last poem in this book before moving on to some other stuff, more recent work, and maybe work that might appear in my third collection. As with my first collection, the last poem in this book also gives some sort of premonition of what might be coming next in the next book. This is called Boundless. Hair knotted with brine, sharpness of salt, soft touch of seaweed breeze, hot gritty sand on bare feet, cool water around ankles, halls, as tide tugs, draws you. Seagulls call and shout. Horizons are everywhere. A world tensed tight with struggles unravels, disentangles, becomes free. And you know how it feels to see forever, as far as love. Thank you. I'll be back in a moment with some new work.